From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Israel's strike against Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, deals a major blow to the terror group and Iranian proxy group. Suddenly, Iran and its proxies are on the back foot thanks to Israel's willingness to act and defy American and European advice. What's next in the region, and what should the Biden administration do to exploit this sudden strategic opening? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with Potomac Watch, our daily podcast for Wall Street Journal Opinion. And I'm here joined today by my colleagues Elliot Kaufman and Joe Sternberg. Welcome, gentlemen. So what a weekend in the Middle East. Netanyahu ordered the strike against Hezbollah leaders on Friday while visiting the United Nations in New York. 2,000-pound bombs were dropped on a neighborhood where Hezbollah leaders were gathered in an underground bunker. The attack marked the demise of Nasrallah, who has been a key figure in the gradual conquest of Lebanon by Iran and Hezbollah. Let's listen to White House spokesman John Kirby describe the consequences.
The command structure has been nearly decimated. Thousands of missiles and drones destroyed by Israel over the last few days. There's no question that the Hezbollah today is not the Hezbollah that it was even just a week ago.
Reporting suggests that the United States was only told by Israel about the attack on Nasrallah after it was in progress, and it comes amid a month-long campaign targeting Hezbollah leaders and their missiles and missile launchers that have been hitting Israel and the north of Israel since October 8th of a year ago, the day after the Hamas massacre. So, Elliot, first to you, what does this tell us about Israel and its strategic plans? There's been a major shift in the last month.
It tells us that Israel is no longer afraid of Hezbollah and to some extent of the larger Iranian axis itself. Israel has had other opportunities in the past to do a move like this and take out Hezbollah's arch terrorist, really in many ways the leader of the country, ruler, dictator of the country, more so than the actual Lebanese government. But it hadn't done that because what we always knew to be true was that any such strike would surely lead to a massive, massive war, and this sort of equation in which an attack on Beirut would mean an attack on Tel Aviv. And thousands of Hezbollah missiles would rain down on Israel, and Israel would pay a huge price, unlike any it has paid before for doing such an action. And yet, here we are, and Hezbollah hasn't done much at all. It hasn't hit Israel in any way, let alone the sort of catastrophic way that we had come to expect. And so Israelis are trying to figure out what that means. Have they degraded Hezbollah's capabilities so heavily in the past week or two that it simply can't coordinate any large response? If that's the case, then there are significant implications for what Israel should do next. Maybe it can get away with doing more to ensure the security of the north. Or is Hezbollah, for some reason, holding back? Is Iran making a strategic decision to hold back? That could also lead to a different Israeli calculus, especially in thinking about a possible ground invasion of southern Lebanon.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit, those possibilities, because the first one you offer, which is that perhaps Hezbollah is so disrupted that it really can't coordinate a major response. That could be true when you think about the fact that in the last 3 or 4 weeks, Joe Sternberg, these attacks on the pagers and the walkie-talkies held by Hezbollah leadership was a surprise, clearly, to Hezbollah. Then you have the fact that these targeted strikes have taken out their leaders, one after another. Before Nasrallah, there were a series of commanders who were taken out, killed. And then even on the weekend after the attack on Nasrallah, you had further attacks that hit commanders. You have had missile launchers and missile stores attacked. So it's possible that Elliot's first scenario is that Hezbollah is so disrupted it can't fire the kind of coordinated attack that Israelis had long feared.
Yeah, Paul, and I think that really is the key insight that the Israelis seem to have come into here. And you can absolutely understand why there's been a lot of historical reluctance over the years to undertake the kind of mission that they have been doing more recently. And I think that a lot of what seems to have been going on here was a certain amount of desperation. I think that Israel realized after October 7th that it could not tolerate, these terror groups and Iranian proxies operating in its neighborhood, perhaps in the same way that it had tolerated them before. And that, sort of reality has led to this realization that, we always thought about retaliation, whether it was Hezbollah retaliation or Hamas retaliation or even Iranian retaliation, as something that would happen outside of whatever action Israel itself undertook. And yet in recent weeks and months, we're finding that Israel itself, the action that is supposed to trigger the fear of retaliation can actually affect your opponent's ability to retaliate. So it hasn't just been taking out Hezbollah leadership here. It is the fact that they were successfully able to take out a Hamas leader in Tehran. And I think that all of these things change the calculus. They change what Israel's opponents are able to do on the battlefield. I mean, they will not be as capable of any kind of retaliation or escalation or whatever else anyone wants to worry about in this situation. Israel's insight is that you don't have to take for granted, or you don't have to take as a given your opponent's ability to strike back at you. You can actually take actions that will undermine that opponent in these important ways.
Hezbollah's deputy secretary general, who's surviving, Sheikh Naim Qassem, issued a statement on Monday saying that the group will elect a new leader as soon as possible and that it's prepared for a long war with Israel. But notably, he did that from a bunker, an undisclosed location, clearly not wanting to become the next target, Elliot. The Iranians have Ali Khamenei, the Ayatollah, has said that there will be revenge for Nasrallah's death, but nothing so far forthcoming. So that will be sometime in the future. Meanwhile, Israel continues to hit targets. There's special forces raids that have gone into Lebanese territory in the south and maybe further into the country to prepare the ground for potential ground invasion. The ground invasion decision does not appear to have been made so far. Clearly, they are moving forces to be able to put them in place if they want to. But I think there has to be some caution on the part of Israel on that front, because the ground invasion, first of all, has the potential to increase casualties for the Israelis enormously, as they have in the past. And you have an Israel Defense Forces that has been basically at war for a year already and taken substantial casualties. And the ground invasion in the past, Israel has gotten bogged down in Lebanon. So all of that has to be on the mind of Israeli leaders.
That is all true. And last week, the message that I was hearing from the Israelis was that we shouldn't let the success get to our heads. We shouldn't let it whet our appetites too much. Why? Because in Lebanon, Israel has a much more limited objective than it has in Gaza. In Gaza, it seeks to destroy Hamas, destroy it, render it incapable as a fighting force, a governing force, all of that. In Lebanon, it knows it won't be able to do that with Hezbollah. It's too big of a country. It shares an open border with Syria, all sorts of obstacles there. And also, Hezbollah didn't carry out the October 7th attack. It joined afterward. What Israel wants to do is to allow its northern citizens, about 60,000 of them, to return to their homes and live in peace. Now, what does that require? It requires, to some extent, degrading Hezbollah's capabilities. It requires reestablishing deterrence of some kind, although you can't rely only on that, lest you have a sword of Damocles above all of those Israelis' heads. And it probably requires clearing out some areas of southern Lebanon, in which Hezbollah is the largest employer. And so as soon as you let the civilians return, who are those civilians? Many of them are Hezbollah members and fighters. They recruit from among the local population. And so as soon as they are back with their infrastructure, including underground tunnels, Israel is no longer safe. And it's that question of southern Lebanon that leads to consideration of a ground operation. Israelis think you probably can't do everything from the air in that regard. And so there is more talk of a ground invasion. I think it's becoming more and more likely, but just a limited one in the border areas, trying desperately not to get bogged down deeper into Lebanon, as has happened in the past. I mean, you have even the leader of Israel's left-wing party, the merger of Labor and Meretz, calling for Israeli occupation of those Lebanese border villages, which have the commanding heights. And so when the left is saying that, it's hard for the most right-wing government in Israeli history to say otherwise, say that's too militaristic or something.
All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about why and how Israel has resisted the advice of the U.S. and Europe on this attack against Hezbollah when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on Potomac Watch podcast with Joe Sternberg and Elliot Kaufman. All of this is being done, notably, against the counsel of the United States, President Biden, the Biden administration. Most of Israel's European allies, I use that word allies advisedly, they have been saying, go for a ceasefire. France and the U.S. put together a proposal with several other nations for a 21-day ceasefire. Yet that ceasefire didn't mention Hezbollah. It mentioned Lebanon, the government there, which is in no position to give orders to Hassan Nasrallah, and Israel. And Hezbollah had no desire to commit itself to that kind of ceasefire, which is one reason that Israel acted. Let's listen to President Biden describe his desire now in the wake of the attack on Nasrallah for a ceasefire.
Are you going to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu? Have anything to say to him? Yes, I will be talking to him. I'll tell you what I say to him when I talk to him. Can an all-out war in the Middle East be avoided? It has to be. We really have to avoid it. We've already taken precautions relative to our embassies and personnel who want to leave, but we're not there yet. But we're working like hell with the French and many others.
Joe, the question I have is, hasn't Israel done more to prevent a larger war in the last 2 weeks than all of the pleading in the last year?
You would think. There's a real air of unreality about the way that the U.S. and so many European countries in particular are approaching the situation. I mean, Paul, I think that you got to a key part of it when you point out that in the situation in Lebanon, for all of this talk of a ceasefire, the party that is actually doing the shooting in Lebanon, Hezbollah, is never included in that kind of discussion. So Israel understands who their opponent is. Israel's putative allies in the West don't seem to know. And I think that, there's also this fact that we shouldn't forget that Hezbollah and also Hamas, while we're at it, are prescribed terror groups in the West. So, Israel's allies are perfectly happy to ban these groups in the West and then turn around and expect Israel to negotiate with them. And I think, really what is happening here, to the extent that Europe or the U.S. might now be worried about some kind of broader regional conflict as a result of Israel's actions to deal with these security threats, the question has to be, what is anyone else doing to help Israel? Precisely because we have understood for such a long time the nature of the terror threat that Israel is facing in these groups. Would it not actually help stabilize the region if we were actually applying pressure to the people who ought to have some pressure applied to them, namely the terror groups, rather than to the democratic ally? And so I think that you end up in this situation where the U.S. and Europe always seem to be on the back foot because we keep trying to apply pressure in the wrong places instead of actually trying to throw our weight behind actions, particularly by Israel at the moment, that would improve deterrence against bad actors, particularly Iran in the region?
Couple of things to explore in that answer, Joe. One is the real urgency in the background here by the Biden administration to try to put all of this conflict, including in Gaza and in Lebanon, just calm it all down for the sake of the election so they can claim a diplomatic victory of a sort. They want to do that. They also, Biden has wanted, and Blinken has wanted for some time, to be able to calm this down so they can mediate a deal between Israel and the Saudis. Mohammed bin Salman, Crown Prince Elliot wants, those parties, both of those parties. I think Netanyahu wants that deal if possible. It's an extension of the Abraham Accord struck in the last year of the Trump administration. MBS wants that deal because he wants American security guarantees along with it, as well as the ability to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes. And Biden fears that this is all now no longer going to happen. And yet, I think that if you look at the response from the Sunni Arabs, as opposed to the Shiites who are the Houthis and Hezbollah, the Sunni Arabs quietly haven't been shouting from the rooftops about this Israeli action. I think they're secretly quite pleased.
I think that's right. And even more so, I think Israel is demonstrating its value to these Arab partners. How so? Well, by being able to take on Hamas, which is a branch of the same Muslim Brotherhood, which threatens many of these Arab states, by then taking on Hezbollah, sort of the crown jewel of the Iranian proxy network, and by not backing off from Iran, as other larger powers, as the U.S. has, as Saudi Arabia itself did in the past, as these other Arab states look around and ask what they want from Israel. Do they want in Israel that isn't able to fight back against Iran because the United States tells it not to? Or do they want in Israel that is able to, and actually is able to bring along U.S. support, even sometimes in defiance of what the U.S. president himself wants in order to fight back against Iran? That seems to me like a much more attractive Israel, a much more attractive partner for these Sunni Arab states as they look at the larger confrontation with Iran.